Welcome to the Dallas Duo Podcast,
your weekly wellness coffee date.
We're friends in Dallas, always looking for the best ways to optimize our health
and have fun along the way.
Welcome to a special Dallas Duo mini-series recorded live at Witness Wellness 2025, the 4th Annual Women's Health Summit in Dallas. Over the course of the day, I'll be sitting down with panel speakers and experts immediately after their sessions to dive deeper into the ideas they just shared.
I created Witness Wellness as a summit for real talk, real experts, and real solutions, covering the topics women often don't get to talk about: hormones, metabolism, mental load, fitness, and more. Whether you're in the room with us today at the slate or listening later, these mini episodes are your backstage pass to actionable insights and honest conversations. Let's jump in to today's guest in session.
Today's guest is Dr. Taylor Reyes. She is a doctor of physical therapy, pelvic floor specialist, and the owner of Fire Physical Therapy. Welcome to the podcast, Taylor.
Thank you for having me.
What was the topic that you presented on today?
I presented on pelvic health through the ages. So we were talking about littles, so pediatrics, and what we call middles, so just 18 to 35-ish. We say 35-ish just because perimenopause can tend to start at 35, and then 35 and up. So when we were talking about littles, we're thinking about what is one of the most common things that affect the pelvic floor. And real quick, the pelvic floor is a group of muscles and other connective tissue structures that sit in between the pubic bone, the tailbone, and the sit bones. So they're responsible for urination, defecation, organ support, sexual function, childbirth, and all of that good business. So with littles, a lot of the times they deal with constipation. Now, is that constipation because of nutrition, or is it because of possible anxiety, or is it because of medications if we want to get really specific? But a lot of times that constipation can lead to bedwetting, which is also a common issue in littles. So is the bedwetting actually an issue because they're drinking too much fluid before bed, or is it because their rectum is too full? So at nighttime when they go to sleep, everything relaxes, their full rectum just pushes on the bladder, and then they don't really have any control. So it's like, what do we do? What do we do for the littles? So we can do some I love you massages, which is a really specific belly massage. We can do warm liquids after dinner, and then also teach them how to diaphragm breathe, which is something that we talked about through the middles and uppers also. Because diaphragm breathing is a great way to stimulate your vagus nerve and your parasympathetic nervous system. So to help get you into that rest and digest state.
That's something that even adults struggle with, is remembering
and
incorporating diaphragmatic breathing.
Absolutely. So if we can start teaching our littles, so even, if they're 18 months old, it's going to be really hard to try to verbalize, hey, this is how you need to diaphragm breathe, but we can mimic it. We can show them in through the nose, out through the mouth, and they can learn from us. They can also learn from us that, no, we don't need to zip from event to event to event to event to event, that sometimes we do just need to stay at home. We do just need to be present. Maybe we don't need to do 17 extracurricular activities at the age of 5. So how do we teach them how to engage their parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to help with their GI function? So that was kind of the main thing with littles. And then the middles, we were talking about how to coordinate your diaphragm and your pelvic floor, because those are synergistic relationships. So when we inhale, the pelvic floor should relax. When we inhale, the diaphragm should contract/drop so the lung can fill with air.
Okay.
And then when we exhale, those both go up, and they should work in this really beautiful synergistic pattern. And when they don't, that's where things can start to arise, like low back pain, stress incontinence, things like that. Okay. So we talked about how to coordinate, and then we talked about relaxation. A lot of pelvic floor issues, especially pain related, and sometimes stress incontinence, is more related to the inability to relax the pelvic floor. You can have a tight pelvic floor and be strong, and you can have a tight pelvic floor and be weak.
Okay.
So that overactive, kind of like if you clench your jaw and your shoulders a lot,
yes,
that same type of tension can find itself in the pelvic floor.
Okay.
So we tell people, relax your jaw, but also relax your bottom.
Well, that's one thing that that really stuck out to me when you were speaking, is because I tend to have a lot of like neck and shoulder things. And when you said that it's all kind of related, that really caught my attention.
Yeah, it's absolutely related. And then the other thing is we want to be able to make sure we're engaging our core, engaging our pelvic floor. So when we're lifting heavy, which we should be, because we need to be challenging our muscles, our joints, we want to be getting those, what we call myokines, which is a protein that's released in muscles when you exercise, which is very anti-inflammatory. So when you are lifting heavy, we want to make sure that you engage your pelvic floor You engage your breath, so you exhale when you lift something heavy. So a little word is, or a phrase we say is exhale with exertion or exhale with effort.
So when you're going into the effort part of the exercise is when you should be exhaling.
Yes. And now I'm not necessarily talking about Olympic lifting, right? That's a whole
That's a
other
different
breathing.
situation.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a whole other breathing strategy. So we talk about that. We also talk about lubrication and how so many times people think that, oh, I think and when I say lubrication, we are talking about in the context of intercourse.
Yes.
A lot of times people do think that they're ready enough, but honestly, the female arousal cycle is so complex that even if you feel superficially that you're ready enough, that might not account for what is needed in the deeper vagina. And so you want to use lubrication.
Okay.
It might not be enough to hit the deeper structures. So using lubrication is very important. I always suggest starting with a water-based lubricant, especially if you have pH issues or recurrent yeast infections.
Okay.
So,
are there any brands that you would recommend specifically?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's 2 brands. I really like Intimate Rose is a company. They're developed by a pelvic floor therapist.
Okay.
They have a water-based lubricant called Serenity, which is really nice. And we use that in the clinic. Another lubricant we also use in the clinic, especially if people want organic products, is Maude, Maude.
Okay.
They have a really nice organic water and aloe-based lubricant. And it's typically safe and typically doesn't irritate people. And then the other thing is always, just like with littles, diaphragm breathing. We want to make sure that we're utilizing our diaphragm breathing to help calm our nervous system and teach our body that we can relax and that we're not being chased by a bear.
Which again, so important at any age, but I think it's really interesting that you suggest teaching that to little kids, younger kids, even at that age. So that's like a coping, would you call it a coping strategy that they can always use when they're in a stressful situation or if they just need to regulate themselves?
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's one of those things. We learn how to brush our teeth, we learn sleep hygiene, we learn, toileting habits. I think that learning how to engage your nervous system is equally important. So the uppers that we talked about is more related to genitourinary syndrome of menopause. So those symptoms can start as early as 35, and we're talking about like vaginal, vulvar dryness, pain with intercourse, but also stress incontinence, overactive bladder symptoms. So as a physical therapist, there's a lot that we can do to help with those symptoms. The first and foremost, honestly, just being pelvic floor therapy, which can involve exercise, customized exercises, manual therapy, education, etc. But even if we have strong muscles, when we have a drop in estrogen, sometimes that we still have issues that may or may not require the help of a physician or someone who can prescribe medication or vaginal estrogen. So some of the other things we talked about is how hyaluronic acid suppositories can be very effective, if not just as effective, as vaginal estrogen for a vaginal vulvar dryness, irritation, and mild pain with intercourse.
Okay. Another thing that caught my attention when you were speaking was when you were talking about leaking isn't normal and it's something that can be helped with pelvic floor therapy.
Absolutely. Urinary leakage is never normal when you laugh, cough, sneeze, jump. Like absolutely never normal, no matter what your mom said. I joke that if you're in the first 6 weeks postpartum, like you get a little bit of grace.
Yeah,
like,
there's a pass there.
There's a pass. But after that, really, we should be able to keep it in unless you just drink 17 Stanleys of water and 7 cups of coffee. Then it's like, okay, well, that's physics. But in a normal situation, you should never be leaking. So pelvic floor therapy can absolutely help that. Yes. So the hyaluronic acid suppositories, vitamin D levels are very important for pelvic pain, pelvic function. Vibrators are also a really great option for people. And I don't mean that just to be silly. I don't mean that in like what's a sex toy issue. I mean it as we would use a massage gun for our calves and our back and our thighs. Why can't we use it for our muscles? Right. And it can help prolapse symptoms too. If someone has a pelvic organ prolapse, sometimes using a vibrator can help and be just as effective as electrical stim therapy, even if you just use it for 20 minutes once a week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be a lot.
Okay.
So it's not like you're going to be in the back in privacy, 5 nights a week. And it just brings blood flow. It helps increase awareness to the tissues and helps with collagen and elastin production because we're exercising those areas. And then total body strengthening, kind of going back to the myokines. When we have anti-inflammatory properties in our body, when we have these proteins that are anti-inflammatory, it can help reduce a lot of the symptoms we're feeling. Overall, yes, there's very specific pelvic floor exercises we can do for pelvic floor strengthening. But if your pelvic floor is strong, but the rest of your body is weak, you're just fighting an uphill battle. So total body strengthening is very important.
Yeah. And I think that's just something we continue to hear, especially as we age and get into that over 35 perimenopausal territory, especially important for women. So it's interesting to hear its connection to pelvic floor as well, which makes sense because it's muscles.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned the vagus nerve and the
Mhm.
importance of the vagus nerve. Can you give us a little crash course on what it is and why it's important?
Yes. So the vagus nerve, it's the 10th cranial nerve. It's the longest nerve in the body. And it is a big regulator for the parasympathetic nervous system. So
Okay.
sympathetic is like fight, flight, freeze, faint. I'm being chased by a bear. OMG, I need to punch the shark in the nose. That's sympathetic. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. So we do need a little bit of both at all times to stay alive. But there's certain times when we want a little bit more sympathetic, like when we're running a race, when we're being chased from a bear, when we're taking a test.
Mhm.
And then there's times where we need more parasympathetic tone, which is when we're trying to sleep, trying to eat,
Mhm.
right? So how do we find a balance? Well, the easiest way to stimulate the vagus nerve, which feeds into what we were talking about, the parasympathetic nervous system, is by diaphragmatic breathing.
Mm.
So, which diaphragmatic breathing is different than belly breathing. So, a lot of times in yoga, they teach you to really fill your lower belly with the inhale. What we want to do is three-dimensional rib cage expansion when we're breathing. So, I tell people if they put their hands around the lower part of their rib cage and their upper belly, when they inhale, their fingers, like the thumbs in the back and the fingers in the front and the palms on the sides, should be expanding three-dimensionally when you inhale.
Of course, I have to do it. So you want to
Exactly.
feel it
Yeah,
when
you
you're
wanna feel
breathing
it.
in, when
Yeah.
you're inhaling. Okay.
So I joke, like you take little Lego, like you make your hand like Lego hands, and then your thumbs go in the back of your ribs, and the front of your fingers go in the front of your ribs,
Okay.
and you wrap around, and then you want to try to inhale and make sure your hands are expanding.
Okay.
So that's different than filling your lower
Then,
belly.
yeah, trying to
Mhm.
fill the belly. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to say this. I love Pilates. I think Pilates is great. However, a lot of times, especially when we're doing kind of those higher load, like short rep
Mhm.
moves, people can tend to start to compensate through their obliques and their rectus abdominis, and they lose that breathing pattern and they
Okay.
start over clenching in their upper abs, which can inhibit core function, which can feed into pelvic floor issues and
Oh,
low back
wow.
pain. So
So that'd be
this
like clenching more like with your upper
like,
abdomen.
yeah, you think about your upper abs and the side of your abs kind of cinching down and in with
Mhm.
effort. We always want to think about your abdominal muscles contracting from the bottom up like you're zipping your pants. So now, again, it's not bad to work the obliques. It's not bad to work the rectus, but obliques and rectus abdominis are not core muscles. They're abdominal muscles. They're not core muscles.
Okay.
So we want to make sure that we're supporting and nourishing our core, and that when it's time to be heavy on the obliques, we can do that, but we can also pivot back to normal core function just as easily.
Okay.
So another thing that I did mention is like if you're trying to stimulate your vagus nerve besides diaphragm breathing, so maybe you just had a surgery and it's hard for you to take deep breaths,
Yes.
like or a C-section or whatever. And I will say diaphragm breathing is so gentle. That is one of our number one core exercises or pelvic floor exercises that you could do diaphragm breathing immediately after a C-section.
Oh, wow.
Right? Because the thing is, if we are breathing correctly, like you have to be able to breathe, right? Like you
Yeah.
can't, like, sure, doing a sit up is going to be very challenging and you shouldn't do that right after a C-section, but you do have to breathe. So
Yeah.
diaphragm breathing is a very easy exercise you can do right off the bat. Now, that's not medical advice. Don't go doing things you shouldn't be doing. But what I am trying to get, the point I'm trying to get across is diaphragmatic breathing is incredibly gentle. And if you are breathing, it should be diaphragmatically. Right?
Okay.
So that's the point I'm trying to get across. So if you can't diaphragm breathe for whatever reason, or you can't really expand your rib cage, you can listen to really nice music that stimulates the branch of the vagus nerve that's around your ear. Meditation, gargling, humming, especially like open mouth humming, like
Okay.
that vibrates that branch of the vagus nerve. Singing is a great way to do that. Sipping on cold water and even doing like a face cold plunge. And those are great ways to stimulate vagus nerve.
Okay. And you had mentioned that there was like kind of a big difference between if you're just sipping cold water or room temperature. Like,
Yeah,
there's a
so
difference there?
especially in like a traditional Chinese medicine, one of the themes is that you want to sip on warm water or room temperature. That you don't
Okay.
really want to drink cold stuff.
Okay.
That's a whole other discussion and philosophy. But when we are talking about stimulating vagus nerve, it doesn't mean sip on cold liquids all day. It means when you need to stimulate it, you start sipping on a cold beverage to
Okay.
stimulate it,
To
in like short
specifically.
bouts. Do I drink iced drinks? Sure. I do, especially in the summer. I really enjoy that. And I don't feel any negative side effects when I do that. I don't struggle with headaches or constipation. So I will say that if you are someone who's curious about this concept and you notice, hey, when I do drink cold liquids, I get constipation or I get headaches, maybe that's something you want to lean into.
Okay. And you also mentioned like in the evening, warm water. Is that also something that, since we're on the topic of water?
Yeah, right. When we were talking about the warm water at night, it was one of the methods to help to help address the constipation in littles. And this works for adults as well.
Okay.
But you can do like 20 minutes after dinner, you do your little tummy massage.
Okay.
And then you follow it up with some warm liquid, preferably tea, herbal teas, right?
Okay.
And now you can always cater your tea to whatever your needs are. But that warm liquid is going to help encourage peristalsis, which is the contraction of the GI system.
Okay.
So that's going to help get that moving through the night because really during the nighttime, your GI is getting ready to release a load in the morning. So a lot of times people think that as long as they go poop once a week, that they're not constipated. And that's the furthest from the truth. Regularity is subjective. So really what we want to be seeing is 1 to 3 times a day, especially a bowel movement first thing in the morning. So if you're going once every other day, you're consistent. That doesn't mean you're regular.
Okay. So there's a big difference between consistency and regularity.
And also constipation might not be the straining to get poop out, but it can be the texture. So there's something called the Bristol stool chart. And so if I would have people look that, you can just Google Bristol stool chart. And the texture of your stool can indicate constipation and how dehydrated it is.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah. I think I know what you're going to say, but if there's one tip that listeners can take today or one actionable item, what would you say that is based on what you spoke on today?
Diaphragm breathing is going to be so powerful for no matter where you are in your journey and just having awareness.
Yeah.
I know that this is kind of 2 things.
No, that's okay. 2 tips is great.
I don't think I mentioned this here, but earlier in the talk, I told people who cares about core function? Typically everybody.
Everyone, yeah.
Well, your pelvic floor is 1/3 of your core.
Yeah.
So if you really care about core function, we need to be curious. So have diaphragmatic breathing as a mastered skill. And be curious.
I love that. So tell us, where can we find you? Tell us all about your business and where we can find you on Instagram, all the things.
So on Instagram, my handle is Dr. Taylor Reyes. And we also have a clinic Instagram. It's just Fire Physical Therapy, FIRE, Physical Therapy. Our website is firephysicaltherapy.com. If anybody is curious, FIRE is an acronym. It stands for Functional, Intentional, Restorative, and Empowered.
Okay.
So those are the pillars that we strive to incorporate in every visit.
Okay.
Because we want it to be functional, we want it to be intentional, we want it to be restorative and empowering for our people. So our clinic is based in, the address is a Dallas address. Locally we would call it Addison. So we see men, women, and some kids, some basic kid issues. We do orthopedics, pelvic floor, lymphatic. We have a therapist that does lymphatic therapy.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So we do a little bit of everything because being able to have that holistic approach is really important.
Yes.
Like I said, the core is, a lot of pelvic floor therapists will say that the pelvic floor is just between the belly button and the thighs, but I would say it's between the diaphragm and the top of the knees. Okay. And honestly, fibers of the diaphragm go all the way up to C3, go up to the top of your neck. So we really do look at it holistically. And yeah, I think that's kind of our thing. I will say that in our clinic, when people come in for visits, we donate 10% of every initial evaluation to a prosthetics clinic and wheelchair shop in Guatemala called Transitions Foundations.
That's amazing. I love that. Well, and fun fact, Whitney and I recorded our very first podcast episode in the Fire Physical Therapy conference room. Yeah, thanks again for that. And I know Whitney and I both really want to have you on again to dive deeper into some of these topics.
Oh, yes.
So we'll definitely have to get that on the schedule. We look forward to that.
Please, I can't wait.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And that's the end of this episode. Thank you for tuning in to this Witness Wellness mini episode with the Dallas Duo podcast. A big thanks to all the speakers for sharing their expertise and journeys. Make sure to check out their work and follow them on their Instagram, website, and any other resources provided.
Be sure to catch more interviews as we bring you even deeper insights from this summit. If you're listening later, check out the full Witness Wellness lineup and revisit the sessions you missed. Thanks for being a part of our community of women committed to real wellness. Until next time.